Welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video. This is my 1000th video. I saw my ticker number was coming up and I thought, ooh, the number 1000th video. I need to do something special for that. And this topic, which you know from the thumbnail, I was actually going to do this as my 5,000 subscribers celebration question thing. But at the current rate that my subscribers are growing, and I have had a whole bunch of new people, so welcome and thank you for that. But at my current rate, it's going to be another year if and when I reach 5,000 subscribers. So I thought, no, let's take this topic and maybe fast forward it or roll it into my 1000th video. So that's what we've got here. As per the thumbnail, what is my favorite video game of all time? There are three. Now, another reason this is kind of important for me to do this now is my buddy Alan Stewart, Maymeister, has a new podcast out called the Nice and Nasty Video Game Podcast, where he asks guests, if you could play only 3 games for the rest of your life, what would they be? And if you could only choose, or if you could choose 3 games to erase from existence, what would they be too? And I thought, ooh, if Alan asks me to do that, I'm going to kind of spoil what the topic of this video is. So I thought, I better get this one out now so that I can re-emphasize some of these choices for his podcast if he ever asks me on. So, what is my favorite video game of all time, and why are there 3 of them? My favorite video game, had you asked me a few years ago, and throughout my entire life, my favorite video game of all time, Adventure for the Atari 2600. Absolutely. I played the dickens out of this when I was a kid. I still play it for nostalgia purposes every once in a while now. Love this game. It is the first roguelike experience I had where no 2 games are ever the same, like option number 3 where you've got randomized things going on in the map. It's got intrigue. It's got a huge world. It's got a challenge to it. Rindle, the red dragon, is a real, he comes after you. You're in trouble. There are times that you're reaching for the sword to be able to take on one of the dragons, and the bat comes down and takes the sword away, and you're like, I'm gonna die. Like, the randomization and the fact that it's this adventure, literally as per the title, it's an amazing game, and I loved it. I played the living heck out of it, and you might notice a complete lack of any Legend of Zelda content on my channel, and that's because for me, when I saw the first of those on the NES, I was like, this is Adventure, but with better graphics. You're Pretender to the Crown. What? Adventure was the game that started that. So for me, Adventure is to me what Legend of Zelda is to a lot of the NES generation. It is so beloved. My favorite game. And it's become quite iconic. It's got a very critical role scene in the movie, the Ready Player One. The whole Easter egg thing. I don't know if you've seen the movie or if you know the Easter egg in this, but I'm so thrilled that my favorite video game of all time has such an important part in an important book and movie in the modern zeitgeist. That's awesome. You go to any retro event, you'll see the duck-like dragons, in a poster or on a t-shirt or whatever. It's got a lot of cachet. My favorite video game of all time is very, very iconic and important, and I love it. Now here's where we get a little bit splitting hairs. Yes, this is my favorite video game of all time at home, but you got to remember, in the late 70s, early 80s, when this came out, the video game arcade was central to what video games are to us. So yeah, you can play something at home, but the real video games, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, etc., they're in the arcade. Oh, sure, there's Pac-Man and Donkey Kong for the Atari 2600, but real video games are in the arcade. So I've always thought, I feel I should specify that my favorite video game of all time is not always the video game that is on the Atari 2600. I should have a subsection of, while I was in the arcade, because you can't play Adventure in the arcade. And if I'm in the arcade, what's my favorite video game there in that venue? The more real video game space. this is an obscure one. You would think, oh, it's Pac-Man or Street Fighter because I love Chun-Li, or Asteroids. I've got that little New Wave Toys, little Asteroids cabinet, which I love to death, and I love Asteroids. Weirdly, my favorite arcade video game is a bit of an obscure one. Cobra Command from Data East. It's a Laserdisc game. It's not quite like Dragon's Lair or Space Ace where you have to just do QuickTime events. It's actually got, you line up your shots and you shoot the helicopters and you're destroying the tanks or you're pulling yourself out of the canyon. It is more of an adventure, or sorry, it's more of a video game than, say, Dragon's Lair and those other Laserdisc games. But there was something very cool, that anime style and the adventure of going through and shooting down things and all that kind of stuff. It was like, hey, it really caught my eye when I first saw it. And then I began to become quite good at it. I could figure out, I could memorize. It's all those QuickTime event games, all those Laserdisc games were largely memorization. I eventually got to a point where I could play that thing all the way through to the end, to the final boss. And that was kind of a moment of prestige for me. It's like, hey, here's a game I can actually finish. Look at me go. And it would be rather impressive. I'd be in the arcade, I'd be getting to like last levels and stuff, and people would be walking by and think, hey, that guy's got really far in the game. It's like, yes, I have. I'm a Cobra Command awesome expert. And also, you got to remember, I was dirt poor when I was in that age group. So I'd have maybe 75 cents in my pocket. So to be able to plunk 1/4 into Cobra Command and have it last me 20 minutes, half an hour, that meant something. So when my friends and I were in the arcade, it's like, okay, good, there's a Cobra Command. I can play something. I can be part of the atmosphere, part of the world of video games, but I'm also not like out of money right away. So Cobra Command is my favorite arcade game, in the arcades. And I always thought, man, it'd be nice to get like a home version of that. There are a few. It came out on the Sega CD, which I did have, but it looked so low res and chunky and crunchy. I was just like, ooh, I don't think I want to get that. I tried it out and I was just like, it feels very hamstrung. But it did come out for the PlayStation 1 in Japan. This is a dual pack of 2 Laserdisc arcade games turned into PlayStation 1 games for Japan. Thunderstorm, which is what they call Cobra Command on this compilation, and also Road Blaster, which is also known as Road Rasher, whatever. There's the one where you're driving the car, and that's a little more Dragon's Lair, like turn to the left, turn to the right, hit brakes on time, or you die. But Thunderstorm is Cobra Command on a PlayStation 1, and it looks really good. It's a very close recreation of Cobra Command in a home port. So when Christmas was rolling around, I thought, I've got Adventure, my favorite video game of all time, at home. I should have Cobra Command, my favorite arcade video game, at home. So I got this as kind of, these two can sit on a shelf as my championship moment of my favorite video games of all time. But Cobra Command is also my favorite video game in the arcade. Now you must be thinking to yourself, but you've mentioned there's a third one, and this is where we get into some dicey territory. Yes, I have a modern video game that I think might be dethroning Adventure of my favorite video game of all time. Maybe. And that is No Man's Sky. I have played the ever-living heck out of this. When this first came out, I was kind of interested because I thought, millions of worlds, and you can go anywhere, and you can encounter these different alien animals everywhere you go, and there's a big long story and stuff. I was kind of like, okay, good. And then it had the disastrous launch. In fact, you'll notice there's a for sale sticker. I got this for $13 out of the bargain bin. But the reason I got it, and the reason I got into No Man's Sky, is because then they released it for PlayStation VR. And I had the headset sitting there, and I thought, oh, that sounds amazing. PlayStation VR and No Man's Sky together? Yeah. And it has been glorious. I love No Man's Sky in VR, on PlayStation VR. I've racked up about 600 hours, no lie. My saves are, I've got my main save, which is 500 hours, and then I've done half a dozen of the expeditions that have come out, each of which are a good 30 hours apiece themselves. I've played the heck out of this. I've been to the very center of the galaxy. And it wasn't just, oh, you know somebody, go to their base or just do some stuff with some portals. Those who know the game know what I'm talking about. No, I inched my way along 1,000 or 2,000 light years at a time from where I was on the middle of the Euclid galaxy all the way to the center. I earned that spot. I set up a base. And then I thought, I've got all this time and all of this stuff going on. I'm going to do the opposite. I inched my way to the very outer outskirts of the Euclid galaxy. I have been to the edge of the galaxy in No Man's Sky. I've been to other galaxies too, for those who don't know. You can go to multiple galaxies. But I went to the very outer outskirts of Euclid. I thought, how far can you go? And there's a point where you can't go out any further. And I stopped. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm at the edge of the galaxy. I'm going to set up a restaurant. Little Hitchhiker's Guide joke there for you. Anyway, I've made bases. I have done piles of stuff. I've learned languages. I've dug up art. And people who know No Man's Sky, you know what it's like. This game is amazing. But this is where I put an asterisk on any modern game being considered your favorite video game of all time. Hello Games releases big updates every summer for No Man's Sky where it'll be like, oh, we're introducing VR, or we're going to release it on the Switch, or whatever. And a couple of years ago, they had an expedition where now you have a thing called the Station Override. And I thought, ooh, what does that do? Are we able to take over space stations and like run trade routes and stuff? Am I going to be the main boss of this space station? Is that what that is? I don't know. Got my station override, and months went by, and I was like, what's this thing for? You guys never did release an update that used it. Why is it just sitting here collecting dust in my inventory? And then last summer, I was thinking, okay, a lot of things have happened. They've got the Switch coming out, Switch version. I will not be too upset if it takes a little bit of time. But summer update came out in October, which is like, is that still summer at that point? Whatever. So, yeah, they released the summer update in October last year, the one for the Switch launch, and it was awful. They kneecapped everybody's inventory and power levels. You had players who were like, oh, I can destroy sentinels left, right, and center with my pew-pew gun, and I've got a spaceship that's got... They can just shred any big battle cruiser that it comes across, or I can leap thousands and thousands of light years at a time. And they released an update that kind of nuked a lot of the inventory slots. People who know the game, they know what I'm talking about. And it's like, oh, well, now this isn't much fun. Like, they kind of wrecked the enjoyment, and it led to a bunch of outrage from the community. A lot of people are like, I'm uninstalling this. I hate this. Screw you, No Man, or Hello Games, for doing this. I didn't really care too much. I was kind of like, I was already on the doldrums about like, well, where's the station override thing? What's that all about? So when they ruined everybody's inventory, I'm like, fine. The way I look at that update, I kind of feel it's a little bit like they gave people, they leveled the playing field a little bit. They made it not so everybody's so super powerful. They gave people Brussels sprouts. This is good for you. Have this. You've got this. This is what you have to have because it's good for you. It makes things a little more fair. Fine. And my joke was always, if you're going to give people Brussels sprouts, at least give them some chocolate cake to make it go down smoothly. They didn't do that. They just kneecapped everybody's power and said, there you go. They've kind of backtracked a little bit on it recently. They've made some supercharged slots and things like that. So it's okay. But I was already upset that there weren't the big updates I was looking for. And now this comes along and I was just like, I don't think No Man's Sky is my favorite game now. I think it's awful. And that can happen. Any game can go through a change and be ruined by the developer. Like if you look at Battlefront. I loved the heck out of Battlefront, the one that came out in 2015. Great game. And when Battlefront 2 was announced, and it was so heavily laden with loot crates and gambling, essentially, to the point where EA was taken to court in Europe for that, I was just like, well, you can really mess up something. Or I've talked before about Assassin's Creed. I loved Assassin's Creed back in the day, and then they took it in a direction I didn't like anymore. And I don't play any Assassin's Creed games anymore. That can happen with modern games. You can be in love with something really, really good, but all it takes is a couple of changes from the developer. Maybe the company changes hands and they're suddenly like, hey, we got to start monetizing this. It wrecks it. So, fair warning to anybody who's like, oh, X, Y, and Z, my favorite video game of all time. If it's a modern game, look out. They could nuke that love for you in a second. It's been known to happen. So, there you go. I've got 3 favorite video games of all time. And I guess I want to ask, is that fair? Can I make that assertion? Like, definitely Adventure, my favorite video game of all time. The nostalgia, the love, absolutely great. Do I play it much? I've got lots of ways to play it. In fact, just recently I did that using an original joystick for the Atari 2600 on my Retroid to be able to play stuff like Adventure. But I find I play other stuff. I don't really play Adventure much anymore. It has a great, great memory for me, but I don't know that I play it. So can it be my favorite video game of all time? The arcades, sure, that's a different kettle of fish. Sure, that's in its own little category. But a modern game, No Man's Sky, can I claim that's my favorite video game if it turned awful last year? And it might get better. It might go bad again. Who knows? What do you guys think? Which of those is true? Can I have 3 my favorite video game of all time? Because I kind of do. Anyway, there's that. I wanted to do that for my 1000th video. Really wanted to do it for 5,000 subscribers, but I got other plans for that, if that day ever comes. I guess I'll leave it there. And until next time, we'll see you down the rabbit hole.